Hi, y'all. I'm Curtis Crotty.
I'm Joe Deardriff, and Curtis and I are brokers on the Crotty Group in the city of Chicago and surrounding suburbs.
Today, I think I want to talk about all things that are recession-based. Everybody's so focused on the word recession these days and what's going to happen with home prices, what's going to happen in the market. Is this another 2008?
That's all I keep hearing is recession tied to housing values and housing prices, and what does that mean for people's equity and people that want to buy or sell?
Let's get into it. We can edit that out. But that was our music that I was getting into. A lot of folks are waiting on the fence to buy, and they're waiting for prices to come down. And I don't fully agree with that. I think that we can all agree that the value of homes and home prices is dictated by one thing and one thing only, and that's supply and demand. There's got to be more buyers than there are homes for sale on the market for prices to drop. And that's just not going to happen in the next few years. I've got some hard data here that is national based, but we can kind of make it a little bit more local as we go through it. But nationally speaking, there are 5 million more 35-year-olds right now than there were back in 2007, right before the crash. 35-year-olds being the millennial market, that is the prime age to buy.
It's essentially a whole generation of buyers.
It's a whole generation of buyers. There's more of them now than there were in 2007.
I mean, in 2007, you and I were, I was in...
Ooh, I don't know if I want to get into that.
Yeah. We were not homeowners.
No.
And we were a product of parents who went through that whole crisis with the housing crash.
Yep.
We saw what that did to them, how that scared them, how that hurt them, and potentially even hurt us, growing up in that generation. And so we're coming into homeownership with this big cloud lingering behind us, and we want to learn from the mistakes.
Totally.
But it's a completely different situation right now, which is a good thing.
Yep.
It's a very good thing, and it's all because of supply and demand.
Yeah.
And the tables are completely turned now than where they were at in 07, 08, where supply was extremely saturated and demand began to wane.
100%. Like I said, there's 5 million more 35-year-olds. There's, compared to 2007 again, there's 12 million more households in the world that need housing, in the nation that need housing. There's 12 million more households in the U.S. that are operating that need housing. House prices went up in 2020, 32%. In 2021, they went up 18%. And in 2022, they went up 7%. Experts are projecting that increase will continue in 2023 with a 5% price increase. Prices are going to go up for the next 5 years, mainly based on the fact that there's so much demand. There's so many more young Americans trying to buy homes now, and so much less inventory, so much less new construction than there was in 2007.
And over the last 10 years, all the new construction has been in apartments, which has created a generation of renters. And there's a lot of data on this and a lot of articles about why this generation are becoming chronic renters. And it's because there is a chronic low supply of homes, affordable homes, for this generation to get into.
Yep, yeah. We are at 50% fewer inventory to supply, or inventory supply to the demand that we were in 2007. There are 50% less options for the amount of people there are. That's crazy. There's no way that prices are going to drop.
They're simply not going to drop. And if you are a homeowner right now, it's still an amazing time to sell, regardless if it's winter or if it's summer. Or a lot of people, I'm sure you can agree, tie cyclical events of the year to whether or not it's a good time to buy or sell.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue into bringing things a little bit more local. So in Chicago, specifically speaking, home prices, and this is October, year over year, from 2021 to 2022, home prices were up 5% versus a national 7%. So they're still on the rise. And I think you made a good point about cyclicalness in Chicago. We have our winter market, which is super slow. Buyers have a huge opportunity in the winter market to swoop in and get a deal on something. Sellers don't want to have their house on the market over the holidays. They don't want to risk not getting it under contract. They don't want to move in January when things close. So now's a great time for buyers to swoop in.
And something to keep in mind is a lot of buyers are also sellers at the same time. And so if their home is under contract and they have to buy in many cases. I mean, we're going through this right now with a client.
Yeah. And that's another good point of, is it a good time to buy or sell? If you're buying and selling, you're never going to have the best of both worlds. It's either going to be a good time to sell and you're going to have issues buying, or it's going to be a great time to buy and you're going to have an issue selling. So timing that right is difficult, but if you're doing both, it doesn't really matter where the market's at because you will kind of net out the same from both sides.
And that leads into why supply and demand actually works as a driving factor. It all comes down to motivation. If there's less inventory on the market, buyers are extremely motivated. If it's a slow period, for example, with interest rates being higher, sellers can become more motivated. And so it does shift the power between buyer and seller's markets cyclically. But in terms of long-term home value, that's not as much tied to the cyclical market as it is really who's kind of holding that power, so to speak, when it comes to, at the end of the day, the price you're getting for the home.
Yeah, and you mentioned a good thing too there about interest rates being higher right now and buyer demand being lower because of that. And I get really frustrated with our buyers because this is the market they've been waiting for 2 years. Things have calmed down.
100%.
You can't have a very low interest rate environment and also no buyer competition.
There's a trade-off. If you want to hold the power as a buyer with pricing, you have to give up something. And a lot of times it's going to be rates.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. What about in terms of location to buy? I get this question a lot, especially here in Chicago, of we saw over the last 10 years a lot of neighborhoods increase in value quite a lot. I'm thinking about places like Logan Square, where they really turned a corner. Values have skyrocketed over the last 10 years. I get the question a lot of, where's the new neighborhood? Where's the next Logan Square?
Everyone wants to buy low and sell high, right? They want to be the first one in and then the first one out when it peaks.
Right. Can't have both worlds.
So what are some things to look for to say, okay, this could potentially be a hot spot? There's no crystal ball, right? We can't see the future. There's a lot of things that impact real estate and values, but there are some key indicators we can look at that are going to tell us, based upon experience, when we start seeing these things happen, we can expect values to go up and stay up.
Yeah, I think specifically for neighborhoods, if we're looking at what's the next best spot, I always look at what neighborhoods have the infrastructure in place already. Do they have trains? Do they have public transportation access? Do they already have commercial space there? Do they have restaurants and a nightlife of any kind? Those are the easiest spots to turn. The outskirts or the places that don't have as easy access to that public transit, I think, are going to be the slower burn of an investment growth. And I think from that perspective, Logan Square did great. I'm looking at the North Shore, not quite up to Evanston, but more of the uptown area or Rogers Park as kind of that next spot to really peak.
Yes, if we're looking at like the kind of northern quadrant of the city, definitely for the further north you go, the more affordable things get.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when you're thinking from a suburban point of view, the further west you move, the further your dollar goes. And that's why people kept moving west, 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 west. I can't believe how far the suburbs have gone. It's almost like you need a plane to get to some of the destinations. And it's kind of similar in the city, just in a more zoomed in perspective, where you have to move a little further out from the loop or the main like financial districts in order to stretch your dollar. I mean, we've had plenty of buyers who have looked in those areas because that's where they're finding the affordability, but they're also finding things like new grocery stores. They're finding places to go out without having to be car dependent.
I always look for, if you have a new Target in place, that
And
new
Mariano's.
neighborhood, and Mariano's, that neighborhood's going to pop.
And
that's the first indicator.
A gym. There has to be a gym.
There you go.
No one wants to drive too far to work out because then you're not working out. I think we wanted to talk about how that impacts this perception that home prices are falling, when really it's just a matter of perspective, and we kind of have to zoom out to see that they're not actually falling. They're taking a little blip because they were a little high and now they're coming down a little low. But if you zoom out at the big picture, you're going to see a projection that is still going in an upward direction, right?
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception is that people see sellers making price reductions on their current listings, and that to them translates as prices are dropping. what I think is really happening is sellers are starting too high because sellers' expectations are still from COVID times when things could go in multiple offers. Yeah, bidding wars.
They thought that your listing price was like a suggestion.
Exactly. $600,000 over ask price. No, thank you. Right. So I think the reality is that our price reductions are happening to come to a net level. Here in Chicago, at least, I think prices are leveling off depending on what neighborhood or what area you're in. But again, we're still going to see that growth. Like I said before, 5% year-on-year growth as of October. That's not going down. We might level off to a more normal and average 1% for the Chicago market. I think if you look over the last 2 decades, without having 2008 in the data point there, Chicago has had a very steady 1% year-over-year average growth on home prices. That's also why I love Chicago. We are the steady Eddie growth spot compared to somebody like New York or
many
Los Angeles.
towns in Arizona. I mean, there was a lot of, talk about, Chicago home prices aren't rising as fast as all these other areas. Well, fast forward the clock to today, they're not falling as fast either. And to your point, it's been very consistent. And that's the whole idea of real estate. It's a long game. It's a consistency thing.
Yep.
Just because a few of your neighbors have done a few price reductions doesn't mean it's all out panic and prices are going to keep sliding all the way down. True, the comps sold high because it was a seller's market and buyers were willing to pay that much. Just because 1, 2, 3 people are willing to pay so much for a house doesn't reset the market to that value.
Yeah.
So that's why when you're working with your agent to price your house, it's important to look at data maybe a little further back than typical because you want to get a better idea of what values are in a cooler, stabilized market and not a hot buyer's market.
Yeah, we've had a lot of outliers happen over the last 18 months.
Right.
Just because of that
just because your neighbor
high demand.
Yeah, sold for that high. You have to manage expectations and realize that they got lucky. They sold high.
We've kind of been all over the board here with this topic, but I think
that's kind of where the market is right now.
Yeah.
It's every month is a different story here. But
make sure you're up to date on it all.
Yeah. So long as you're keeping your pulse on what's going on, I think ultimately what we're trying to say is now is still a good time to buy or sell.
Yeah. I mean, if you're thinking about making your decision in the next 5 years, the sooner the better. Prices are going to continue to go up.
Yeah. Don't put your life on hold because of what you're hearing about the market.
Cool. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Curtis.
Again, I'm Curtis Crotty.
And I'm Joe Deerdorf, and we're brokers with the Crotty Group here in Chicago.
Come see us for anything and everything real estate.
So be sure to subscribe and keep up with the goings-on of Chicagoland real estate.
Boom. Done and dusted.
Sound effects complete.
Insert music there.
Mic drop.
Mic drop.